있다, 없다. 있어요, 없어요. 있어, 없어. 있다, 있어, 있어요. 없다, 없어, 없어요. Welcome to lesson 8. My name is Rachel and today we're going to be covering, as you probably guessed, 있다 and 없다. We're going to be building sentences very slowly, but as with the previous videos, please feel free to pause and take more time if you need. If you want some faster practice, then feel free to go ahead and skip ahead to the practice round right here, but otherwise let's go ahead and get started. Today we are going to be going over 있다 and 없다, starting with 있다. Now, 있다 in English very often translates to there is, there are, have, or has, but the most literal translation would be that something exists. So let's take the word 고양이. 고양이 is the word for cat. And if I said a sentence like 고양이가 있어요, then what do you think this might mean? Now, right now, just ignore the fact that there's this random 가 in there, and I've already conjugated 있다 into 있어요. But knowing that 있다 means to exist, then what do you think this sentence might mean? There's actually a variety of answers here. You could say, there is a cat, I have a cat, or a cat exists. A cat exists would be the most literal translation, but I would say that this would be more often said in English as, there is a cat. 있다 also very often translates to have, I have a cat. This translation is okay. It fits some situations really well, and it makes no sense in others, so I prefer, at least for beginners, teaching it as there is, there are. And also, just as a quick side note, to say that you have a pet, such as a cat, it's more often said as 고양이를 키워요. I raise a cat. 키우다 being the word for raise. But anyway, the sentence pattern that we are going to practice today is noun plus 이 or 가, 있다. We'll get into the meaning of 이 and 가 in just a minute, but right now let's start with 있다. 있다 is the dictionary form, but let's go ahead and put it into present tense. The first thing that we will do for all verbs is drop 다. And then we will look at the final vowel. 있다 only has one vowel, which is 이. Now we need to add either a or 어. Last video, we went over the rule that if the final vowel before 다 is not a or 어, then we will add 어. 있어. And lastly, we will make polite by adding 요. 있어요. So here is our sentence pattern right here. Now let's go ahead and get into 이 and 가. 이 and 가 make up the subject particle, which marks, of course, the subject of a sentence. The subject particle is very similar to the topic particle 는 and 은, and sometimes the two are interchangeable. The subtle differences between the two could easily take up a whole video, so for today, the only thing you will need to remember is that when using 있다 to mean there is, there are, you will usually use the subject particle. So that's what we're going to practice right now. 이 will follow a word that ends with a consonant, and 가 will follow a word that ends with a vowel. So let's put these two right down here, and let's try to recreate that sentence, there is a cat, that we just did. Starting with cat. 고양이. Because 고양이 ends with a vowel, we will then add 가. 고양이가. There is. 있어요. 있어요. 고양이가 있어요. There is a cat. Alright, let's go ahead and get into some quick practice with 이 and 가. We're going to practice 10 nouns, and we're going to try to train our brain to quickly add either 이 if a word ends with a consonant, or 가 if a word ends with a vowel. Starting with 영화. 영화 ends with a vowel, so we will add 가. 영화가. 물. 물이. 물이. 나무. 나무가. 구름. 구름이. 개. 개가. 가게. 가게가. 식당. 식당이. 사람, 사람이, 차, 차가, 산, 산이. Now some of these words you might know, and some of them might be new, so let's go ahead and go over the meaning of each one, starting with 영화. 영화 is the word for movie. 물, water. 나무, tree. 구름, cloud. 개, dog. 가게, store. 식당, restaurant. 사람, person. 차, we've learned before, is the word for tea, but it also means car. And today we're going to practice it as car. And lastly, 산, mountain. Feel free to pause the video here if you want to go ahead and write these down, but I'll also have them in this chart up here for a little while. Now let's go ahead and try to make some sentences. There is a dog. 개가 있어요. 개가 있어요. There is a person. 사람이 있어요. 사람이 있어요. There is a store. 가게가 있어요. There is a mountain. 산이 있어요. There is water. 물이 있어요. There is a car. 차가 있어요. There is a restaurant. 식당이 있어요. There is a cloud. 구름이 있어요. Now let's go back to this sentence, there is water. If you wanted to make this a question and say, is there water? Or do you have water? Just add a question mark when writing and raise your voice when speaking, and this will become 물이 있어요? Another quick side note is that you might sometimes hear this in question form as 물이 있나요? The way that I learned this was that adding 나요 to a question sort of softens it. Translating it in English to something more like, do you perhaps have any water? Any chance you have some water? But then I've also heard that there are a lot of different nuances with this, like males and females using it differently, or different dialects using it more often than others, or it adding a subtle sense of wanting to know more, etc. I've personally heard it mostly with people asking store workers questions like, do you have any cucumbers? 오이가 있나요? But as I'm not a native Korean, I'd rather let a native speaker comment on this. I'm just bringing it up now so that you're aware that you might sometimes hear it this way. Okay, back to our sentence, there is water. 물이 있어요. How do you think you might say there isn't water? AKA, water doesn't exist here. In order to make this sentence, we need more than just the word 있다 to exist. We need the word for to not exist, which is 없다. Now, 있다 we just conjugated into the present tense form, which is 있어요. So now let's go ahead and conjugate 없다. First, let's take a look at the last vowel before 다, which is 어. Then we will drop 다. And because this final vowel is not a or o, we will add 어. And let's make it polite. 요. 없어요. And keep in mind that this 시읒 here will carry over into the empty vowel, so the pronunciation becomes 없어요. 없어요. So going back to our sentence here, there isn't water, we need to change 있어요 into 없어요. 물이 없어요. Okay, how about the sentence, there's no restaurant, which could also translate to, there are no restaurants. There is not a restaurant. A restaurant does not exist. English is hard. There is a way in Korean to pluralize restaurants, but this sentence is still very naturally said singularly, so what do you think it might be? 식당이 없어요. 식당이 없어요. There's no cloud. There are no clouds. 구름이 없어요. There's not a person. There are no people. 사람이 없어요. There's no mountain. There are no mountains. 산이 없어요. There's no car. There are no cars. 차가 없어요. Okay, let's try a sentence like, there are no cars at the beach. If you've been following along for a while, then you might remember that to say at the beach, you will say 해변에서. So you might think that this sentence would be very naturally said as 해변에서 차가 없어요. But the sentence is wrong. When it comes to 있다 and 없다, you will mark the place with the particle 에. What? Another use for 에? That's right. But in this case, 에 represents the location only for 있다 and 없다. In a sentence where you're talking about where something is located, where it exists, you will follow the sentence pattern place 에 plus either 있다 or 없다. And this is what you will use when you're talking about the place where something is located. This is in contrast with what we've been practicing in the previous videos, place 에서 plus pretty much most other verbs. This particular pattern is where you do the verb. An example using these two patterns would be, there is a cat at the beach, versus the cat swims at the beach. In a sentence where you're talking about where something is located, where it exists, you will follow this sentence pattern, place 에 plus 있다 or 없다. So going back to this sentence right here, 해변에서 becomes 해변에. 해변에 차가 없어요. There are no cars at the beach. Okay, how about there are no people at the beach? 해변에 사람이 없어요. There is no water at that store. The word for water in store being right here. 가게에 물이 없어요. Alright, let's go back to there is water at the store. 가게에 물이 있어요. Now let's try there are mountains in Korea. If you don't remember, the word for Korea is 한국. 한국에 산이 있어요. There are clouds in the sky. Sky being 하늘. 하늘에 구름이 있어요. Alright, now let's try a slightly new translation. I am at a certain place. This in Korean would translate directly as I exist at place. And the sentence pattern for that is 저는 place plus the particle 에 있어요. Now you might think, wait a minute, why are we using the topic particle here? You just taught us to use the subject particle. And that would be a very good question to ask. As I said earlier, usually 이 and 가 are used with 있어요 and 없어요, but sometimes there are subtle rules in which that's not always the case. In this particular sentence, you certainly could use 이 and 가, but I've noticed that when you're talking about your location for where you're at, I more often see it as 저는. So that's how we're going to practice it today. And really, this 저는 is actually optional. You actually don't even have to say it in the sentence if it's already obvious that you're talking about yourself. So let's go ahead and get 6 places in here so that we can practice saying where we're at. 도서관, library. 해변, beach. 학교, school. 집, house or home. 식당, restaurant. And 가게, store. How might you say, I'm at home? 저는 집에 있어요. 저는 집에 있어요. I'm at school. 저는 학교에 있어요. I'm at the beach. 저는 해변에 있어요. I'm at the store. 저는 가게에 있어요. I'm not at the store. 저는 가게에 없어요. I'm not at the library. 저는 도서관에 없어요. I'm not at the store. I'm at home. 저는 가게에 없어요. 집에 있어요. And in the second sentence, you could say 저는 집에 있어요. But because you've already said it in the first sentence, it's obvious that you're already talking about yourself. So in the second sentence, it sounds rather redundant, so we can just leave it at. Okay, let's try. I'm not at home. I'm at school. 저는 집에 없어요. 학교에 있어요. I'm not at the library. I'm at the beach. 저는 도서관에 없어요. 해변에 있어요. Okay, do you remember how to say there is a dog? 개가 있어요. So now let's try there is a dog at the beach. 해변에 개가 있어요. And this sentence can also translate to the dog is at the beach or a dog is at the beach. And this 해변에 and 개가 can also be reversed. And one final note is that if you wanted to specify the dog, then in Korean you would use the word 그 for that or 저, that over there. This is quite common, but we're going to keep it very simple today and not worry about that for now. Okay, let's play a game called Where is the Dog? Based on this picture here, I want you to say, the dog is at home. 개가 집에 있어요. And for the rest of the questions, I'm going to ask where is the dog in Korean, which is 개가 어디에 있어요. 어디 being the word for where, and 에 marking the location. But when used with question words, I've noticed that it tends to be dropped. So the question becomes, 개가 어디 있어요? So next sentence. 개가 어디 있어요? 개가 학교에 있어요. 개가 어디 있어요? 개가 해변에 있어요. 개가 어디 있어요? 개가 도서관에 있어요. Okay, in summary, the sentence pattern that we have learned today is noun plus 이 or 가, the subject particle, plus either 있다 or 없다. 있다 meaning to exist and 없다 meaning to not exist. Two very common translations for this in English would be have or there is, there are. These are both totally fine. I just tend to teach it as there is, there are, because to have isn't really an exact translation, and it can cause confusion in some situations. Plus, I've noticed a tendency for people to want to add the object particle if you think of it as have. For example, in I have water, beginners might be tempted to say 저는 물을 있어요. But this is grammatically incorrect. It should be 저는 물이 있어요. Literally translating to, as for me, water exists. And then if we want to specify the place where something is located, we will mark the place with the particle 에, not 에서. As in, 해변에 사람이 있어요. There is a person at the beach. And finally today, let's go ahead and get into the practice party, which as always, please pause as much as you need. I will be going faster in this section, but it's not because I expect you to go faster, I just want to save time for the video. So let's go ahead and get those 10 nouns up that you learned earlier today, and let's start with there's a dog. 개가 있어요. There's a tree. 나무가 있어요. There's a school. 학교가 있어요. There's a restaurant. 식당이 있어요. There's a mountain. 산이 있어요. There's water. 물이 있어요. There's a car. 차가 있어요. There's a person. 사람이 있어요. There isn't a person. There are no people. 사람이 없어요. There isn't a tree. There are no trees. 나무가 없어요. There isn't a mountain. There are no mountains. 산이 없어요. Okay, let's look at these 6 pictures here. If you see a check mark, then I want you to say there is blah blah blah. And if you see an X, then I want you to say there isn't a blah blah blah. Starting with mountain. There is a mountain. 산이 있어요. 나무가 없어요. 학교가 있어요. 차가 없어요. 물이 있어요. 식당이 없어요. Okay, let's go ahead and make our sentences a little bit more complicated. There's a dog at the beach. 해변에 개가 있어요. And if you went ahead and switched these two and said it as 개가 해변에 있어요, that would also be okay too. There's a car at the beach. 해변에 차가 있어요. There's water at the restaurant. 식당에 물이 있어요. There are mountains in Korea. 한국에 산이 있어요. There's a person at my house. 집에 사람이 있어요. There's a tree on the mountain. 산에 나무가 있어요. There are no people at the beach. 해변에 사람이 없어요. There's no water at the store. 가게에 물이 없어요. There are no people at school. 학교에 사람이 없어요. I am at home. 저는 집에 있어요. I'm at school. 저는 학교에 있어요. I'm at a restaurant. 저는 식당에 있어요. The dog is at the beach. 개가 해변에 있어요. The restaurant is on the mountain. 식당이 산에 있어요. The cat is at the store. 고양이가 가게에 있어요. And now without looking, I'm at the library. 저는 도서관에 있어요. There's a person at the beach. 해변에 사람이 있어요. There's a car at the restaurant. 식당에 차가 있어요. There are no cars at the school. 학교에 차가 없어요. There are no people at the store. 가게에 사람이 없어요. There are no trees at the school. 학교에 나무가 없어요. And finally, for a challenge, there are no trees on that mountain over there. 저 산에 나무가 없어요. 저 being the word for that over there. If you don't know that grammar, then you might want to go ahead and check out lesson 4. But otherwise, great job today, and I'll see you guys in the next video.